Good morning, everyone. Marty Jackley, South Dakota Attorney General. The South Dakota Constitution does not permit a sitting legislator from receiving state funds based upon their oversight responsibilities. Governor Kristi Noem had requested the Attorney General's office review monies received by Senator Jessica Castleberry and her daycare entities in the tune of about $603,229. That investigation has been completed and a resolution has been reached with Senator Castleberry. The investigation by the Attorney General demonstrated that about $499,129 was received by Senator Castleberry in violation of Article 3, Section 12 of the Constitution. An agreement has been reached with Senator Castleberry to repay all of those funds with interest set at the federal rate. The second group of funds, approximately $104,100, was determined that it ultimately was targeted for qualified financially needy families. The monies went directly to the parents and the kids, and therefore those dollars were not in the benefit of Senator Castleberry and would not be included in the repayment plan. Pursuant to the agreement, the parties have further agreed that we will not seek reimbursement from those families and those kids, that it was a matter that, again, those dollars went to their intended purpose and they are appropriate. The investigation did not demonstrate any inappropriate expenditures by Senator Castleberry of the $603,229. They went for DSS approved expenditures. I would like to conclude by thanking Governor Noem's office as well as Senator Castleberry for cooperation throughout this investigation, as well as the Attorney General team, including Judge Barnett, for their work to put this matter to rest. With that, I certainly would answer any questions starting in the room.
Yeah, thank you, Attorney General Austin Goss, the Coach Scout. Can you go over in broad strokes maybe what, a couple of weeks ago we talked about negotiations were sort of ongoing. Can you speak about maybe what those negotiations did or didn't entail?
Certainly. The first thing that, as in any investigation, we needed to see the documents. That we recognized that there were certain allegations, but we needed to see the contracts that the senator entered into. We needed to see the email chains. We needed to see the payment requests, the warrants that were paid off by the auditor's office. That information needed to be reviewed and looked at. The second stage with respect to a payment plan, this is where the cooperation came in. I'm not going to disclose the numbers, but Senator Castleberry opened up her books. She opened up her financial statements, her tax returns. All of that was reviewed to ensure that, number one, we could reach a point where we knew where the money went. We knew what it was used for. We could show where the targeted money had gone to children. And we could show that a payment plan was appropriate and viable.
Follow up. Other lawmakers have been shown to have contracts of a similar nature. Has there been any sort of formation of an investigation into other lawmakers since this news broke a couple weeks ago?
In order for there to be an Attorney General investigation, it would really come from one of three sources. And this is derived from the process, but as well as the case law that is many years old. One means would be, as in the Senator Castleberry's case, where the governor or an agency under the governor in the executive branch would make a request to the Attorney General to do an investigation of either dispersed funds or the expenditure of those funds. The second mechanism that could happen would be through the legislative process and review. The legislature has what's called the Auditor General. It could happen in the appropriations process, but the Auditor General could request such an investigation. And then the third type, and this would be what was experienced in the Carol Pitts case, it could come from the People's Auditor, the state auditor, where there may be a warrant request for payment or vouchers that may call into question and request an Attorney General review. The reason it would have to come from one of those three sources is the Attorney General would need to have the contract. The Attorney General would have to have all the payment records. and documents to establish some type of violation of Article 3, Section 12. And so for order that to happen, it would come from one of those three sources. At this time, the only requested investigation was from the governor relating to Senator Castleberry and her daycare entities, and that investigation has been completed. And again, by the cooperation efforts of Senator Castleberry and her counsel, we've reached a fair and good resolution.
You mentioned that the larger of the lump sum that she's going to owe back has a federal interest rate attached to it. Do you know exactly what that interest rate is?
Yesterday, it would have been 4.03%.
Thank you.
Approximately.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
Any questions from those on the phone? Please unmute your phones to ask a question.
Attorney General Jackley, this is Jody at DRG Media Group.
Good morning, Jody.
Is Senator Castleberry expected to pay in one lump sum, or is this going to be a payment plan? Is there any information available about that?
It will be a payment plan. The payment plan was established based upon the Attorney General's review of her business financial records as well as tax returns. The payment plan, and again, this will be provided to the public, is essentially about $2,400 a month at the federal rate of interest for the $499,129.
Thank you.
Lee Strubinger, SDPD.
Good morning.
Good morning. I was just wondering if you could maybe describe a little bit. I mean, $499,000 is a lot of money, but that money went toward DSS approved expenditures. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what that sort of means in relation to this business that Castleberry was running or is running?
Certainly. In other words, we were looking for expenditures that may have been outside of DSS approval process, expenditures that may not have gone to kids, that may not have gone to food, operating expenses, employees, mortgage payments. And we found that all of the $603,229 went for daycare related expenses, those that would satisfy the DSS, and many of them did satisfy the DSS approval process. Those funds, the $104,100, were what I would call a straight pass-through. They passed from Department of Social Services to Senator Castleberry directly to families that qualified. Under SDCL 4-8-2, the state statutorily could seek to have that $104,100 brought back in. We've elected not to do that. I don't feel that would be appropriate. Those families qualified. They didn't have anything to do with whether or not a sitting senator was involved. Those monies went to what Congress expected those monies to go to, and there was really no benefit to the senator or any of her oversight in relation to those dollars. But with respect to the $499,129, those were used for what I would classify as daycare related expenses. They weren't for anything inappropriate. They were for what you would expect to be used in a daycare operation.
And then my follow-up is, can you talk a little bit about, I mean, obviously COVID was an extraordinary event and the state is facing a childcare crisis. If this money was used for those things, can you talk a little bit about sort of the situation maybe that we were in, but also with Castleberry as like a state lawmaker? Seems like her business was doing everything kind of correctly based on the investigation, but given the nature of her status as a lawmaker, can you talk a little bit about this?
COVID was an extraordinary time. There was approximately, in relation to these funds, about $1.25 billion that the federal government had provided to the state of South Dakota that was dispersed. But I think what you have to look at what our founding fathers said in Article 3, Section 12, is that it would not be appropriate to have a sitting lawmaker that has oversight responsibilities over funds receive those funds. And that's what's embedded in our Constitution. A sitting lawmaker cannot receive either a direct or an indirect benefit from state contracts. And so it's a balance. Again, that balance was achieved with the $104,100 because those were a flow through. They went straight to needy parents that qualified under the rules. But with respect to the other funds, those would have been and are, in my opinion, in direct violation of the state constitution. When there is a violation of the Constitution, it voids a contract. It's not a criminal matter. And again, there are no penalties. The federal rate of interest was chosen, a responsible payment plan. And part of that goes back to, again, to the credit of Senator Castleberry. She cooperated with the investigation, and she was able to work with us with her financials to put together a plan that is achievable and does respect and pay back taxpayer dollars.
Eric Mayer with KELOLAND News.
Good morning, Eric.
I was wondering if you could provide some insights. You know, Senator Castleberry said she sought legal counsel before accepting this monies. Does this prove, would you have legal, what would your advice be to lawmakers, I guess, moving forward after this?
Well, certainly lawmakers, 105 of them have different financial experiences and settings. You know, certainly Article 3, Section 12 is fairly straightforward. There are numerous decisions that the South Dakota Supreme Court has issued dealing with the Board of Regents and Carol Pitts to asphalt paving recently. And I think which is so important in relation to this case, Governor Noem had requested the South Dakota Supreme Court to issue an opinion regarding these exact dollars. And in October of 2020, the South Dakota Supreme Court issued what we call an advisory opinion, which is pretty rare, but they issued an opinion. It was a unanimous decision that set forth what's appropriate for sitting legislators. And so with respect to this matter, we have a constitutional provision that is straightforward. We have existing case law, and we have a governor's advisory opinion. So it made it very straightforward. I would just encourage the 105 members of the legislature, if they have questions, seek guidance from private counsel. That private counsel will obviously look at Article 3, Section 12. We'll look at that case law, including the Noem advisory opinion, and can make a determination with respect to specific businesses.
Annie Todd, the Argus leader. I guess I'm just wondering, Senator Castleberry, from what I understand, accepted these funds over 3 years. Like, why did it take so long for this to come to your notice?
You know, what I can tell you is on approximately around July 25th, I received a request from the governor to look into $603,229. You know, I think realistically, the state had been provided a $1.25 billion. This wasn't anything that appeared to be hidden. I've personally reviewed the contract, and Senator Castleberry signed it. So she wasn't hiding that she was a senator, and I think it's public record she was a senator. Everybody, you know, generally knows that. And so I can't tell you anything beyond I received a letter. I did my responsibility and looked into the investigation and made that independent determination that $499,129 was not appropriate under our Constitution and would need to be paid back, but that $104,100 that went to those needy families is appropriate. It went to the targeted source, and those monies would not be requested back.
This is Kayla Henderson with Coda News. And were there any steps oversighted or missed when filling out the application? Like, was the rule specific enough?
When you say the rule specific enough, what rule are you referring to?
and like the COVID relief fund application when filling that out?
I have reviewed those application matters. What I would say is certainly on October 22nd, 2020, when the South Dakota Supreme Court issued a very public opinion, these matters were known. With respect to the DSS process on application, approval, and expenditure, we reviewed that. It appeared appropriate. I'm not going to suggest that I or my Attorney General team is an expert in Department of Social Services qualifying expenses. We rely upon that entity to say whether or not those expenditures were appropriate, and they did indicate they were appropriate.
AG,
Austin.
So the 100,000 plus and some change that the daycare got to keep, the argument is that it went effectively directly to the families and thus
Yeah,
isn't.
it would be 104,100, and it will be what I would refer to as a pass through. In other words, it went from Department of Social Services to Senator Castleberry, and then not to operating expenses, not to food, not to mortgages. It went straight to the families. So the families receive those dollars. And so under 4-8-2, there's a state statute that says if you receive those funds, the Attorney General could go seek those. And what I've said, number one, that would be the wrong thing to do. And I think it's the wrong thing to do because, number one, these needy families qualified, they met the standards, and they shouldn't be penalized for what has occurred. And furthermore, the way those dollars went through is exactly what Congress wanted. And so therefore, those $104 or $104,100 went to where they should go, and they will not be part of the repayment plan. And furthermore, you'll see in the agreement, both parties have agreed to that, to not seek those funds back from those parents.
Lee Schubinger again, SDPD. I'm sorry if I missed it, but could you describe the payment plan, or is that kind of confidential? Like, is this going to be paid out over 2 years, or what's that going to look like?
It's very public. I mean, my position is an agreement such as this has to be transparent, so you'll get to see the actual agreement. But the gist of the agreement is $499,129. We looked at the financial records of Senator Castleberry because it wouldn't do the state or her any good to set a payment plan that can't be realistically achieved. So we broke it down. We looked at about what was realistic. We set it at, it's just shy of $2,400 a month. It contains the interest rate. We use the federal interest rate, which is compounded interest. And again, yesterday it was at about 4.03%. And so it should be achieved, in roughly, and there'll be some early payments, and when she can afford to pay, she has the ability to pay off early. But, it's in a payment plan that's going to take probably in the range of 20 to 30 years. And that payment plan can be affected because if you look at Article 3, Section 12, a sitting lawmaker can't receive funds. They have to sit out 1 year from the date they leave. It's right in the Constitution. Because they're voting on appropriation bills, they have a level of oversight over those bills. But, from whenever Senator Castleberry, if she ever does leave office, she would be eligible for additional state funds after the 1 year waiting period that's set forth in our Constitution.
It seems like, all things considered, you've had a lot of nice things to say about having worked with Senator Castleberry on this. Can you sort of elaborate how she has been and sort of how she's treated this throughout the process?
So it would not be appropriate for me to speak directly to Senator Castleberry because she's represented. I will say that I've spoke several times to her counsel. I know Judge Barnett probably had more conversations with her counsel. I mean, certainly she opened up her books. Perhaps if a lawsuit would have been filed, a judge would have allowed some of that, but we were allowed to look at tax returns, financial statements, emails, some of which, again, we might have been entitled to, and perhaps it would have been deemed inappropriate until a collection stage in a lawsuit. And so she was exceptionally cooperative. and further cooperative on the expenditure side. I mean, certainly we wanted to make sure with respect to the $603,229.79 that every dime of those taxpayer dollars didn't go to something inappropriate. And so she provided on her end what those dollars look like. And again, we confirmed that with Department of Social Services. So it was a cooperative investigation on the office of the governor and Senator Castleberry, where both sides wanted to get to the bottom of what is potentially void under our Constitution and what do we do about it. And as Attorney General, I felt that the $104,100 just was not appropriate to seek back under the circumstances. And they were agreeable to that.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Call me if you need anything. The press release will be going out soon, probably within the next hour. Thank you very much. And the settlement will be part of the press release. Thank you very much for joining.